Andrew Clark's calloused hands gripped the deed to what everyone called the most worthless piece of property in Millbrook County. The broken bridge spanning Willow Creek had been abandoned for decades, its wooden beams sagging dangerously into the murky water below. What they didn't know was that beneath those rotting planks lay a secret worth $280 million, a fortune that would transform this struggling father's life in ways no one could imagine. The community had laughed when he bought it for $800, calling him crazy for purchasing what looked like kindling. Little did they know, this broken bridge would soon become the most valuable structure in the entire state. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the creek as Andrew Clark stood at the edge of his newly purchased disaster. His worn work boots crunched against the gravel path leading to what remained of the old Willow Creek Bridge. At 42 years old, Andrew had the weathered hands of a man who had spent most of his adult life working construction jobs that barely paid the bills. His flannel shirt, faded from countless washes, hung loosely over his thin frame, a testament to the meals he had skipped to ensure his 8-year-old daughter Lucy had enough to eat. The bridge before him was a monument to neglect. Built sometime in the 1920s, it had once been a proud crossing point for the rural community. Now, half of its wooden support beams had collapsed into the creek below, creating a twisted maze of rotting timber and rusted metal brackets. The remaining structure leaned precariously to one side, as if one strong wind might send the entire thing tumbling into the water. Andrew pulled the crumpled property deed from his jacket pocket and read it again, still hardly believing what he had done. $800. That was nearly every penny he had saved from his last construction job. Money that was supposed to go toward Lucy's school supplies and their overdue rent. His ex-wife Sarah had called him an idiot when she found out, threatening to take Lucy away permanently if he couldn't provide a stable home. The sound of approaching footsteps made Andrew turn. Old Pete Garrison, who owned the hardware store in town, was walking toward him with a bemused expression on his weathered face. Pete had lived in Millbrook his entire 73 years and had seen his share of questionable decisions, but this one took the cake. "Well, I'll be damned, Andrew," Pete said, shaking his gray head. "You really went and bought this pile of splinters, didn't you?" Andrew forced a smile, though doubt was already creeping into his thoughts. "Morning, Pete. Just came to take a closer look at my investment." Pete laughed, a raspy sound that echoed off the water below. "Investment? Boy, the only thing you're going to get out of this mess is a hernia from hauling away all that rotten wood. What in God's name were you thinking?" The question hung in the air, like morning fog. Andrew had asked himself the same thing 100 times since signing the papers at the county office. The truth was, he had been thinking about lumber. Good hardwood was expensive, and even weathered beams could be salvaged, cleaned up, and sold to the antique dealers who came through town looking for reclaimed materials. He had calculated that if he could extract enough usable wood from the bridge, he might be able to turn a small profit. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all he had. "I figure there's got to be some decent timber in there," Andrew said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Some of these old bridges were built with premium hardwood. Could be worth something to the right buyer. Pete scratched his chin, looking skeptical. "Maybe, but that's assuming you can get to it without the whole thing collapsing on your head. That structure hasn't been safe for 20 years. County condemned it back in 2005. As if to emphasize Pete's point, a loud crack echoed from the bridge as one of the remaining support posts shifted slightly in the current. Both men instinctively took a step back. "You be careful out there, Andrew," Pete said, his tone turning serious. "I know times are tough for you, but Lucy needs her daddy in one piece. This old bridge ain't worth dying for." After Pete left, Andrew stood alone with his thoughts and his doubts. The morning sun was climbing higher, and he could hear the distant sounds of Millbrook waking up. Children laughing as they walked to school, car doors slamming as people headed to work, the normal sounds of a community going about its business. Everyone had somewhere to be, something to do. Everyone except him. He thought about Lucy, probably getting ready for school right now, at Sarah's apartment across town. She was so smart, always asking questions about everything, always dreaming about the places she would go, and the things she would do when she grew up. She deserved better than a father who bought broken bridges with grocery money. But standing there looking at the wreckage, Andrew began to see something different than what everyone else saw. Where they saw rotting wood and rusted metal, he began to see structure and possibility. The bridge had been built during an era when craftsmanship mattered, when builders used the finest materials available. Beneath the decay, there had to be something worth salvaging. Andrew walked carefully onto the more stable section of the bridge, testing each plank with his weight before committing to it. The wood groaned and sagged beneath his boots, but held. Up close, he could see the construction more clearly. The main support beams were massive, at least 12 inches square, made from what looked like old-growth oak or chestnut. Even weathered and gray, they showed the quality of timber that was nearly impossible to find anymore. The creek burbled 20 feet below, its water brown and murky from recent rains. Somewhere in that tangle of fallen beams and debris was his investment, his gamble on a better future for himself and Lucy. He just had to figure out how to extract it safely. Over the next few days, Andrew began developing a plan. He would need tools, heavy equipment he couldn't afford to buy, but might be able to rent or borrow. He would need help. Though finding someone willing to work on such a dangerous project for the little money he could pay would be challenging. Most importantly, he would need time, and time was something he was rapidly running out of. The first person to offer help came from an unexpected source. Marcus Webb, a young man who had recently moved to Millbrook from the city, stopped by the bridge site on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was in his late 20s, with the soft hands and clean clothes of someone who had never done manual labor, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was looking for a change. "Excuse me," Marcus called out as Andrew was examining one of the fallen support beams. "Are you the guy who bought this bridge?" Andrew straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Guilty as charged. Andrew Clark." He extended a dirt-stained hand. Marcus shook it firmly. "Marcus Webb, I heard about your project from Pete at the hardware store. He said you were planning to salvage the timber. That's the idea, assuming I can figure out how to do it without getting myself killed." Marcus smiled. "Well, I don't know much about construction, but I've got a strong back and nothing better to do with my time. My job at the insurance company doesn't start for another month, and I'm getting pretty bored sitting around my apartment. Think you could use some help?" Andrew studied the younger man carefully. Marcus clearly had no idea what he was volunteering for, but there was something genuine about his offer. "I can't pay much," Andrew warned. "Actually, I can't pay anything right now, but if we manage to salvage enough timber to make a profit, I'd be happy to split it with you." "Fair enough," Marcus said. "When do we start?" They started that afternoon. Andrew had managed to borrow a small crane from his former boss at the construction company, along with some basic rigging equipment. The plan was to carefully lift the fallen beams out of the creek and onto the bank where they could be properly examined and cleaned. The work was harder than either man had anticipated. The fallen timber had been soaking in creek water for years, making it incredibly heavy. Some pieces had shifted and become wedged against the bridge supports, requiring careful maneuvering to free them without causing further collapse. By the end of the first day, they had managed to extract only 3 beams, and Andrew was beginning to question his judgment once again. The wood was in worse condition than he had hoped, waterlogged and beginning to rot in places. Even if he could clean it up, he wasn't sure it would be worth enough to justify all the effort. But Marcus seemed oddly enthusiastic about the project. "You know," he said as they sat on the creek bank sharing a thermos of coffee Andrew had brought, "there's something kind of romantic about this old bridge. I wonder what stories it could tell if it could talk." Andrew looked at the structure with tired eyes. "Probably just stories about people trying to get from one side to the other without falling in the water." "Maybe," Marcus said. "But think about it. This bridge was built in the 1920s, right? That was during Prohibition. This whole area was pretty remote back then. I bet all kinds of interesting people came through here." The comment stuck with Andrew as they continued working over the following days. The 1920s had indeed been a turbulent time in American history. Bootleggers, rum runners, and other unsavory characters had operated throughout rural areas like this one. It was an interesting thought, but not one that would help him turn a profit on his investment. Word of the bridge project spread through Millbrook with the efficiency of small-town gossip. Most of the commentary was less than supportive. At the diner where Andrew sometimes grabbed coffee, he overheard conversations about his foolish purchase. The general consensus seemed to be that he had finally lost his mind. "That Clark boy always was a dreamer," he heard Mrs. Henderson telling her friend over breakfast. "But this takes the cake. Throwing away good money on a pile of rotten wood. No wonder his wife left him." The words stung, partly because there was truth in them. Sarah had left him because she was tired of his grand schemes and failed ventures. She wanted stability, security, a husband who came home with a steady paycheck instead of wild plans to strike it rich. Maybe she was right. Maybe this bridge project was just another example of his inability to face reality. But as Andrew and Marcus continued their work, something began to change. The physical labor was exhausting, but oddly satisfying. There was something therapeutic about working with his hands, about taking something broken and trying to make it useful again. For the first time in months, Andrew felt like he had a purpose. They developed a rhythm. Early mornings were spent planning which beams to extract next, evaluating the safest way to remove them without causing further damage to the structure. The middle of the day was devoted to the heavy lifting, using the crane and various rigging techniques to pull the massive timbers from the creek. Late afternoons were for cleaning and examining their haul, sorting the wood by quality and potential value. It was during one of these afternoon sessions that Marcus made the discovery that would change everything. They were working on a particularly large beam, one of the main horizontal supports that had been part of the bridge's original construction. Marcus was using a pressure washer to clean decades of mud and algae from its surface when he noticed something unusual. "Andrew, come look at this," Marcus called out, his voice carrying a note of excitement that made Andrew drop his own work and hurry over. The beam, now cleaned of its coating of creek bottom sediment, showed evidence of human modification. There were tool marks that didn't match the original construction, areas where the wood had been carefully hollowed out and then sealed again. "What do you think?" Marcus asked, running his fingers along the altered sections. Andrew examined the marks more closely. Someone had definitely modified this beam after its original construction, creating hidden compartments within the solid wood. The work was skillful, done by someone who knew what they were doing. But why would anyone hollow out a bridge support? "Help me flip this over," Andrew said. "Let's see if there are more on the other side." They used crowbars to roll the massive beam, revealing even more evidence of modification. The entire bottom side had been carefully hollowed out, creating a space large enough to hide significant cargo. More intriguingly, the modifications showed signs of having been sealed with some kind of wax or resin that had hardened over the decades. Marcus looked at Andrew with growing excitement. "You don't think—" "I don't know what to think," Andrew replied, but his pulse was quickening. "Let's see if we can open one of these compartments." They worked carefully, using heat guns and small tools to soften and remove the old sealant. The first compartment they opened was empty except for some rotted cloth, but the second one yielded something that made both men gasp. Nestled in the hollowed-out space was a small canvas bag, still intact despite decades of humidity and exposure. Andrew lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight. Inside the bag were stones, dozens of them, ranging in size from marbles to golf balls. Even covered with decades of grime, they caught the afternoon light in a way that suggested they were far more valuable than ordinary rocks. "Are those what I think they are?" Marcus whispered. Andrew picked up one of the larger stones and rubbed it clean with his shirt. Beneath the grime, the surface was smooth and clear, with an internal fire that could only mean one thing. "I think these are diamonds," he said, his voice barely audible. They found more compartments in that beam alone, each containing similar bags of stones. Emeralds, sapphires, rubies, and what appeared to be more diamonds than either man had ever seen in one place. By the time they had finished examining their find, the sun was setting, and they were sitting beside a collection of gemstones that could potentially be worth a fortune. "We need to be careful about this," Andrew said, his mind racing with implications. "We can't just walk into town with a bag full of precious stones. People will ask questions we don't have answers to." Marcus nodded, still staring at the gems in amazement. Do you think they're real? I mean, all of them? I don't know. We'll need to have them appraised by someone who knows what they're doing. But Marcus, if these are genuine, if they're worth what they appear to be worth, we need to think very carefully about how we handle this. They agreed to keep the discovery secret while they figured out their next steps. The gemstones were carefully rebagged and hidden in Andrew's truck, and they continued working on the bridge as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. That night, Andrew lay awake thinking about the implications of their discovery. If the stones were real, where had they come from? Who had hidden them in the bridge supports? And most importantly, what legal claim did he have to them? The property deed gave him ownership of the bridge and everything on it, but gems hidden by unknown persons decades ago presented a complex legal situation. He would need advice from someone who understood these matters, but hiring a lawyer would mean revealing the discovery to another person, expanding the circle of knowledge, and potentially complicating things further. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to the bridge site. Sheriff Daniel Martinez and County Commissioner Janet Reynolds arrived just as Andrew and Marcus were preparing to resume work. Both officials looked serious, and Andrew felt his stomach drop as he wondered if somehow word of their discovery had leaked out. "Morning, Andrew," Sheriff Martinez said, tipping his hat. "Sorry to bother you, but we've had some complaints about your work here. Folks are worried about safety issues." Commissioner Reynolds stepped forward, consulting a clipboard. "The county has received 3 formal complaints about dangerous activities at this site. There's concern that your salvage operation could cause the remaining bridge structure to collapse, potentially blocking the creek or causing environmental damage." End quote. Andrew felt panic rising in his chest. "Sheriff, Commissioner, I've been very careful about safety. We're using proper equipment and taking every precaution." "I'm sure you are," Sheriff Martinez said diplomatically. "But the county has liability concerns. If someone gets hurt, or if there's environmental damage, the county could be held responsible since this is technically a public waterway." Commissioner Reynolds consulted her clipboard again. "We're going to need you to provide proof of insurance and get a permit for salvage operations. The insurance requirement alone is $50,000 minimum coverage." $50,000 in insurance coverage was far beyond Andrew's means. He looked at the remaining bridge structure, at the beams still waiting to be extracted from the creek, and felt his dreams crumbling. Without the ability to continue the salvage operation, he would never recover his investment, let alone turn a profit. Worse, the secret compartments they had discovered would remain forever hidden beneath the murky water. "How long do I have?" Andrew asked quietly. "The county is suspending all work on this site as of today," Commissioner Reynolds said. "You have 30 days to obtain the proper permits and insurance, or the county will have the remaining structure demolished and removed at your expense." After the officials left, Andrew and Marcus sat in stunned silence. The gemstones hidden in Andrew's truck suddenly felt like a cruel joke. They had discovered what could be a life-changing fortune, but they might not be able to access the rest of it. "There has to be something we can do," Marcus said finally. "We can't just give up now." Andrew was thinking the same thing. The beam they had already extracted represented only a small fraction of the bridge's original structure. If one beam had contained so many hidden compartments, how many more secrets were waiting to be discovered in the remaining timber? That afternoon, Andrew made a decision that went against every instinct for caution he possessed. He would find a way to have the stones they had already recovered appraised, and if they proved to be as valuable as they appeared, he would use that money to obtain the permits and insurance needed to continue the salvage operation. The nearest gemologist was in the state capital, a 3-hour drive from Millbrook. Andrew called ahead and made an appointment, claiming he had inherited some old jewelry and wanted to know its value. He and Marcus made the trip the following day, carrying a small sample of their discovery in a nondescript paper bag. Dr. Patricia Wong's office was located in a professional building downtown, surrounded by other businesses that dealt in valuable items. Coin dealers, art appraisers, and antique specialists occupied the neighboring suites. Dr. Wong herself was a small, precise woman in her 60s who had spent her entire career evaluating precious stones for insurance companies, estate attorneys, and private collectors. "These are quite unusual," Dr. Wong said as she examined the stones under her microscope. The cutting quality suggests they're quite old, probably from the early 20th century. Where did you say you acquired them? Andrew stuck to his prepared story about inherited jewelry, but Dr. Wong's questions were making him nervous. She seemed to sense there was more to the story than he was telling. The provenance of gemstones can be quite important, she continued, especially with stones of this quality. These emeralds, for instance, appear to be Colombian, probably from the Muzo mines. Very high grade, extremely valuable. The diamonds are old European cut, which dates them to before 1930. She continued her examination for nearly 2 hours, carefully weighing and measuring each stone, consulting reference books, and making detailed notes. Finally, she looked up at Andrew with a serious expression. Mr. Clark, I need to ask you directly. Are you certain these stones were legally acquired? Because what you've shown me today represents a very substantial value, and stones of this quality from this era raise certain questions. Quote, Andrew felt sweat forming on his forehead. What kind of questions? Dr. Wong set down her magnifying glass and folded her hands. The combination of stones you've brought me, the age and quality, the fact that they appear to have been stored in less than ideal conditions for many years, all of this suggests they may have been part of a collection that disappeared under unusual circumstances. She turned to her computer and began typing. There are databases that track stolen or missing gemstones, particularly high-value collections that disappeared during certain historical periods. The 1920s and 30s were particularly notorious for gem thefts, often connected to organized crime during Prohibition. Andrew's mouth went dry. He hadn't considered the possibility that the stones might be stolen goods. If that were the case, his legal claim to them could be worthless, regardless of his ownership of the bridge. However, Dr. Wong continued, the statute of limitations on such matters is typically quite complex. If these stones had been missing for 90 years or more, and if you can demonstrate legal ownership of the location where they were found, your claim might be valid regardless of their original status. She printed out a detailed appraisal report and handed it to Andrew. The numbers on the page made his hands tremble. Even the small sample they had brought for evaluation was appraised at over $2 million. Dr. Wong, Andrew said carefully, hypothetically speaking, if someone found a much larger collection of similar stones, what would be the best way to handle the situation? She smiled knowingly. Hypothetically speaking, I would recommend consulting with both an attorney who specializes in property law and another who understands art and antiquities recovery. The situation would need to be handled very carefully to ensure all legal requirements are met. The drive back to Millbrook was mostly silent. Both Andrew and Marcus, lost in their own thoughts about the magnitude of what they had discovered. $2 million for just a small sample meant the complete collection could be worth tens of millions, possibly more. It was more money than either man could have imagined, but it also represented complications neither had anticipated. Back in Millbrook, Andrew found himself looking at his hometown with new eyes. The small houses, the quiet streets, the people going about their ordinary lives, all of it seemed somehow different now that he knew he was carrying the secret of such enormous wealth. He thought about Lucy, about the life he could provide for her with this kind of money. College tuition, travel, opportunities he had never dreamed of offering her. But first, he had to figure out how to legally claim the treasure and continue the salvage operation to recover the rest of it. The 30-day deadline from the county was ticking away, and he still needed to find $50,000 for insurance coverage, plus additional funds for proper permits. The solution came from an unexpected source. Marcus, who had been quietly researching their options, came to Andrew with a proposal. His family, it turned out, had more resources than he had initially revealed. His father was a successful attorney in the city, and his mother had connections in the art and antiquities world through her work at a museum. I've been thinking, Marcus said, as they met at the bridge site. What if we approach this differently? Instead of trying to do everything in secret, what if we bring in the right people from the beginning? My father specializes in property law, and he knows attorneys who handle found treasure cases. My mother's museum connections could help us with the historical research and proper documentation. Andrew was hesitant to expand their circle of knowledge, but he was also realistic about their situation. They needed professional help to navigate the legal and logistical challenges ahead. "What would be in it for your family?" Andrew asked. "I mean, they don't even know me." Marcus smiled. "My parents have been worried about me since I moved out here. They think I'm wasting my life. That I should be pursuing a career in the city like my older brother. If I can show them I'm involved in something significant, something that requires real responsibility and decision-making, it might change their opinion of my CA choices." They agreed to contact Marcus's father that evening. Attorney James Webb listened to their story with professional skepticism, asking detailed questions about the discovery and their handling of the situation so far. His initial reaction was cautious but not dismissive. "You boys have stumbled onto something that could be quite significant," he said during their conference call. "But you've also opened a can of worms that could cause you serious legal problems if not handled correctly. The good news is that your ownership of the property gives you a strong legal foundation. The challenging news is that found treasure cases are complex and often take years to resolve." Attorney Webb outlined a plan that would require significant upfront investment, but offered the best chance of securing legal ownership of the entire collection. They would need to file proper claims with state and federal authorities, conduct historical research to document the provenance of the stones, and establish clear chain of custody for everything they had found and everything they hoped to find. The cost would be substantial, but Webb was willing to work on a contingency basis, taking his fees from the eventual recovery rather than requiring payment up front. More importantly, he had contacts who could help them obtain the permits and insurance needed to continue the salvage operation. Within a week, their small operation had transformed into something much more sophisticated. Archaeological consultants were brought in to properly document the bridge structure and recovery process. Insurance investigators examined the site to establish appropriate coverage levels. Historical researchers began digging through archives to trace the bridge's construction and the people who might have used it during the Prohibition era. The transformation was remarkable, but it also attracted attention. Millbrook had never seen so many out-of-town professionals arriving for any kind of project. Speculation about what Andrew had really found began replacing mockery about his foolish investment. Sheriff Martinez stopped by the site again, this time with genuine curiosity rather than official concerns. "Andrew, I've got to ask, what exactly are you boys up to out here? First you're salvaging timber, now you've got archaeologists and insurance adjusters crawling all over the place." Andrew had rehearsed an answer for this question. "We found some items that might have historical significance. The professionals are helping us make sure we handle everything properly." It was technically true, though it barely scratched the surface of the real situation. The sheriff seemed satisfied with the explanation, but Andrew could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. Law enforcement officers developed instincts for when people weren't telling the complete truth. The archaeological team's preliminary report confirmed what Andrew and Marcus had suspected. The bridge structure contained numerous modified beams, all showing evidence of having been altered sometime in the late 1920s or early 1930s. The modifications were sophisticated, done by someone with considerable skill in woodworking and an understanding of structural engineering. More intriguingly, the historical research was beginning to paint a picture of the bridge's role during Prohibition. County records showed that the remote location had been the site of several law enforcement raids during the early 1930s. Federal agents had suspected the area was being used as a storage and transfer point for illegal alcohol, but they had never been able to locate the actual contraband. "It's starting to make sense," Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the lead archaeologist, explained to Andrew and Marcus as she showed them historical photographs and documents. "This bridge would have been perfect for smugglers. Remote location, multiple escape routes, and the ability to hide large quantities of goods in the structure itself. If bootleggers were operating here, it's entirely possible they diversified into other forms of contraband." End quote. The gemstones they had discovered were becoming less mysterious and more explicable. Professional criminals during Prohibition often dealt in multiple types of illegal goods. Gems were portable, valuable, and easier to hide than bulky cases of whiskey. A sophisticated smuggling operation might well have used the bridge as a long-term storage facility for their most valuable items. But if that were the case, why had the gems never been retrieved? The research team was working to answer that question as well, tracking down newspaper archives and court records from the era. What they found was a story of violence and betrayal that helped explain why such a fortune had remained hidden for so many decades. In 1932, federal agents had raided what they believed was a major bootlegging operation centered around Willow Creek. The raid had gone wrong, resulting in a shootout that left 3 people dead and several others wounded. Among the dead was a man named Vincent Caruso, who federal investigators believed was the leader of the smuggling ring. Caruso's body had been found near the bridge, apparently shot while trying to escape across the creek. The other members of his organization had either been killed, arrested, or had fled the area immediately after the raid. None of those who survived had ever returned to Millbrook, at least not under their real names. It's quite possible, Dr. Mitchell explained, that Caruso and his associates intended to retrieve their hidden valuables after things cooled down, but with Caruso dead and the others scattered or imprisoned, the location of the hiding places died with them. The story added legitimacy to Andrew's claim while also explaining why the treasure had remained undiscovered for so long. But it also raised new questions about how much might still be hidden in the remaining bridge structure. The salvage operation resumed with much more sophisticated equipment and techniques. Instead of simply pulling beams out of the creek, the team was now carefully dismantling the entire structure piece by piece, documenting each component and systematically checking for hidden compartments. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Nearly every major structural beam contained secret compartments, and most of those compartments contained additional bags of gemstones. The quantities were staggering, far beyond what Andrew and Marcus had initially discovered. Dr. Wong made several trips to Millbrook to conduct preliminary appraisals of each new batch of stones. Her estimates kept climbing as the quality and quantity of the gems became apparent. By the 3rd week of the enhanced salvage operation, her conservative estimate had reached $150 million. But the most dramatic discovery came when they reached the bridge's main foundation supports. These massive timbers, which had been partially submerged for decades, contained the largest compartments of all. When they were finally extracted and opened, they revealed not just bags of loose stones, but actual jewelry pieces. Necklaces, bracelets, brooches, and rings, all featuring gems of extraordinary quality and historical significance. These aren't just stolen gemstones, Dr. Wong explained as she examined the jewelry pieces. These are museum-quality antique pieces, probably dating from the 1800s or early 1900s. Some of them appear to be European, possibly from estate collections that were broken up and sold during economic turmoil after World War I. End quote. The implications were staggering. What they had discovered wasn't just the hidden stash of local bootleggers, but apparently the accumulated wealth of a sophisticated international smuggling operation. The total value was approaching levels that seemed almost fictional. Attorney Webb called an emergency meeting to discuss the legal and practical implications of their discovery. The conference room in his law office was crowded with experts, archaeologists, appraisers, insurance investigators, and several other attorneys who specialized in different aspects of found treasure law. Ladies and gentlemen, Webb began, we are dealing with what appears to be one of the most significant treasure recoveries in modern American history. Conservative estimates place the total value at over $280 million. The number hung in the air like something from a dream. Andrew found himself thinking about his $800 investment and wondering if he was still asleep in his small apartment. However, Webb continued, with discoveries of this magnitude come complications of proportional scale. We need to be prepared for challenges from multiple sources. Federal authorities will want to ensure all legal requirements are met. State governments may assert claims based on abandoned property laws. And there's always the possibility that descendants of the original owners of some pieces may come forward with valid claims. The legal team had developed a comprehensive strategy for establishing clear ownership, but it would require patience and significant ongoing legal expenses. The good news was that Andrew's ownership of the bridge property provided a strong foundation for his claims, and the extensive documentation they had gathered strengthened their position considerably. More immediately, they faced practical challenges about how to handle such an enormous quantity of valuable items. Security, insurance, storage, and eventual disposition all required careful planning and substantial resources. The solution was to involve a major auction house that specialized in estate jewelry and historical artifacts. Representatives from Pemberton Associates, one of the most prestigious auction houses in the country, flew in to examine the collection and provide guidance on proper handling and eventual sale. Elizabeth Pemberton herself, the third-generation owner of the auction house, spent 2 days in Millbrook examining the recovered items. Her excitement was evident, despite her professional demeanor. "Mr. Clark," she said on her final day in town, "what you have discovered represents not just extraordinary financial value, but genuine historical significance. Some of these pieces belong in museums. Others will be of tremendous interest to private collectors worldwide. This could be one of the most important auctions our house has ever conducted." The preliminary arrangements for the auction were complex, but they offered Andrew the best chance of realizing full value from his discovery, while ensuring all legal requirements were met. The auction house would handle security, insurance, cataloging, and marketing, while taking a percentage of the final sales proceeds. But even with professional handling, the process would take time. Authentication, documentation, legal clearances, and marketing could easily take 18 months or more. Andrew would need to be patient, but the wait would be worth it. In the meantime, his life in Millbrook had changed dramatically. The secret was impossible to keep any eye longer, and the entire community was buzzing with speculation about exactly what had been found at the bridge. Most people knew it was something valuable, but the actual magnitude of the discovery remained known only to the core team. Andrew's relationship with his daughter Lucy had improved tremendously, though she didn't yet know the reason why. He had been able to catch up on overdue bills, rent a better apartment, and spend more quality time with her. Sarah, his ex-wife, had noticed the changes and was cautiously optimistic that Andrew was finally getting his life together. "I don't know what you've been doing lately," she told him when he picked Lucy up for their weekend visit. "But whatever it is, keep doing it. Lucy says you seem happier, more relaxed. That's good for both of you." Andrew smiled, thinking about the future he could now provide for his daughter. College would never be a financial concern. Travel, experiences, opportunities. Everything he had dreamed of giving her was now within reach. But he was also determined not to let sudden wealth change the fundamental values he wanted to teach her. The bridge site had been transformed into something resembling an archaeological dig. Professional equipment, security fencing, and round-the-clock guards had replaced the simple salvage operation that had begun months earlier. Tourists were starting to find their way to Millbrook, drawn by rumors of a major treasure discovery. Local businesses were beginning to benefit from the increased attention. Pete's hardware store was selling more supplies than ever as curiosity seekers and amateur treasure hunters arrived hoping to discover their own fortunes in the area. The diner was serving more meals, and the small motel on the outskirts of town was booked solid for the first time in years. "I've got to hand it to you, Andrew," Pete said one morning as Andrew stopped by for coffee. "I thought you'd lost your mind when you bought that old bridge. Now it looks like you're the smartest guy in town. That's the way it goes sometimes, isn't it? The thing that looks like the biggest mistake turns out to be the best decision you ever made." Andrew nodded, but privately he was still getting used to the idea that his desperate gamble had paid off so dramatically. There were moments when the whole situation felt surreal, as if he might wake up and find himself back where he started, broke and desperate and mocked for buying a pile of rotten wood. The final phase of the salvage operation took place 6 months later, when the last of the bridge's foundation stones were carefully removed from the creek bed. Even these massive granite blocks yielded surprises, with several containing carefully concealed metal containers that had been sealed and hidden beneath the waterline. The containers held documents as well as additional valuables, maps showing smuggling routes throughout the Mixef region, coded correspondence between members of the criminal organization, and most significantly, detailed records of their operations and the sources of their stolen goods. The documentation would prove invaluable in establishing the legitimate provenance of the recovered items, in strengthening Andrew's legal claim to the treasure. Marcus had emerged from the experience as a changed person as well. The shy, uncertain young man who had wandered onto the bridge site looking for something to do had become an integral part of the operation. His natural curiosity and attention to detail had made him invaluable to the CIA archaeological team, and he was considering changing his career plans to pursue graduate studies in historical archaeology. "You know," he told Andrew as they watched the final beam being lifted from the creek, "when I first offered to help, I was just bored and looking for an adventure. I never imagined it would turn into something like this. I feel like I've found my calling." Andrew understood the feeling. The months of careful work, the gradual revelation of the bridge's secrets, the collaboration with experts from around the country, all of it had given him a sense of purpose and accomplishment that went far beyond the financial rewards. He had taken something broken and worthless and transformed it into something extraordinary. The legal proceedings moved forward with encouraging progress. Federal authorities had conducted their own investigation and concluded that Andrew's claims were legitimate. State officials had reached a settlement that acknowledged his ownership while requiring him to donate several historically significant pieces to state museums. Insurance companies had completed their assessments and approved coverage for the full value of the collection. Importantly, no legitimate claims had emerged from potential heirs or previous owners. The criminal organization that had hidden the treasure had left no surviving members, and the original victims of their thefts were either long dead or represented by institutions that showed no interest in pursuing recovery after so many decades. The authentication process had revealed even more extraordinary details about the CS collection. Several pieces were traced to European royal collections that had been dispersed during the political upheavals of the early 20th century. Others had been stolen from wealthy American families during a wave of high-profile burglaries in the 1920s. A few pieces were so unique and historically significant that they belonged in major museums rather than private collections. Dr. Wong's final appraisal report documented over 3,000 individual items, with a combined value of $287 million. The number was so large that Andrew had difficulty relating it to his own life and circumstances. He consulted with financial advisors about how to manage such wealth responsibly, determined not to let it corrupt the values he wanted to maintain. The auction itself became a major international event. Collectors, museums, and investors from around the world traveled to New York City for what Pemberton Associates marketed as the sale of the century. The catalog alone, a beautiful hardbound book documenting each item in the collection, became a collector's item in its own right. Andrew attended the auction with, Lucy, who was now old enough to understand that her father had discovered something truly remarkable. She sat quietly beside him as items sold for prices that seemed to have no connection to any reality she understood. A single emerald necklace sold for $12 million. A diamond bracelet brought $18 million. A matched set of ruby earrings and pendant sold for $25 million. "Daddy," Lucy whispered during a break in the bidding, "are we really rich now?" Andrew smiled and squeezed her hand. "We have enough money to do whatever we want, sweetheart. But the most important things haven't changed. We still have each other, and we still need to be good people and help others when we can." The auction lasted 3 days and generated intense media coverage. When the final hammer fell, the total proceeds exceeded even the most optimistic projections. After auction house fees, legal expenses, and taxes, Andrew's share came to just over $200 million. The transformation of his life was immediate and overwhelming. Within weeks, he had purchased a beautiful home for himself and Lucy, established college funds and trust accounts, and begun exploring ways to use his newfound wealth to benefit the community that had been his home. Through both good times and bad, the Millbrook Community Foundation received its largest donation ever, funding new programs for education, healthcare, and economic development. The old bridge site was preserved as a historical landmark, with a museum telling the story of the discovery and the colorful history of the area during Prohibition. Pete's hardware store received an anonymous donation that allowed him to expand and modernize, ensuring it would continue serving the community for years to come. Andrew also established a scholarship program for young people pursuing careers in archaeology, historical preservation, and related fields. Marcus was the first recipient, using the funding to complete his graduate studies at a prestigious university program. But perhaps the most significant change was in Andrew's relationship with his family. Sarah, initially skeptical about his sudden wealth, gradually came to understand that his good fortune hadn't changed his fundamental character. If anything, the experience had made him more thoughtful and responsible. They began discussing reconciliation, taking things slowly but building toward a future together. "I was wrong about you," Sarah told him one evening as they watched Lucy play in the backyard of their new home. "I thought you were irresponsible, always chasing impossible dreams. But you never gave up, and somehow one of those impossible dreams came true. Maybe I should have had more faith." Andrew thought about the morning he had stood at the edge of Willow Creek, looking at a broken bridge, and wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The man who had stood there was desperate, broke, and mocked by his community. The man he had become was wealthy beyond imagination, respected, and secure in his ability to provide for his family. But the most important change wasn't the money or the status. It was the confidence that came from proving to himself and everyone else that sometimes taking a risk, believing in possibilities that others couldn't see, and refusing to give up in the face of mockery and doubt could lead to extraordinary outcomes. The broken bridge, that had once seemed like a symbol of his poor judgment, had become a testament to the power of persistence and vision. Where others had seen only rotten wood and rusted metal, he had seen potential and possibility. Where others had seen failure and foolishness, he had found the determination to keep working toward his goals. Years later, when Lucy was older and asked him about the secret to his success, Andrew would tell her about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, of believing in her own judgment, even when others doubted her choices, and of understanding that sometimes the most valuable treasures are hidden in the most unlikely places. The bridge itself was gone now, replaced by a modern structure that served the practical needs of the community. But the old foundation stones remained, incorporated into the museum and memorial garden that commemorated one of the most remarkable treasure discoveries in American history. Visitors came from around the world to see the site and hear the story of the broke father who had been mocked for buying a pile of splinters and had found a fortune worth $280 million. The story had become legendary, inspiring books, documentaries, and countless retellings that grew more elaborate with each version. But for Andrew, the real treasure wasn't the gems or the money or the fame. It was the knowledge that he had been right to believe in himself, right to take the risk, and right to pursue his vision even when everyone else thought he was crazy. He had proven that sometimes the difference between success and failure was nothing more than the willingness to see possibilities where others saw only problems. The broken bridge had taught him that things weren't always what they appeared to be, that patience and persistence could reveal hidden value, and that the most worthless-looking investments could sometimes yield the greatest returns. These were lessons he would carry with him for the rest of his life, and lessons he was determined to pass on to his daughter. Standing in his beautiful new home, surrounded by the security and comfort that his discovery had provided, Andrew sometimes thought about that morning when he had first walked onto the broken bridge. He had been a different person then, desperate and uncertain about the future. The bridge had been different too, broken and apparently worthless. But beneath the surface, both the man and the bridge had contained hidden potential waiting to be discovered. The difference was that Andrew had been willing to look beyond appearances, to invest his time and energy and hope in something others dismissed as worthless. He had been willing to rebuild, to take apart what was broken and examine it piece by piece until he found the treasures it contained. In the end, that willingness to see beyond the surface, to believe in hidden possibilities, and to work persistently toward goals that others considered impossible, had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. The broken bridge had become the foundation for a better future, proving that sometimes the most unlikely investments yield the most extraordinary returns. The story of Andrew Clark and the broken bridge had become more than just a tale of found treasure. It had become a testament to the power of persistence, vision, and the courage to pursue dreams that others consider impossible. And for the people of Millbrook, it had become proof that extraordinary things could happen in the most ordinary places, if someone was willing to look beyond the surface and believe in hidden possibilities. Years passed, and the legend grew, but the fundamental truth remained the same. Sometimes the most valuable treasures are hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting for someone with enough vision and determination to discover them. Andrew Clark had been that someone, and his willingness to see potential where others saw only problems had changed everything. The broken bridge was gone, but its legacy lived on in the lives it had transformed, the community it had enriched, and the inspiration it provided to dreamers and risk-takers everywhere. It stood as proof that sometimes the most foolish-looking investments turn out to be the wisest decisions, and that the difference between success and failure often comes down to the willingness to believe in possibilities that others past your eye cannot see. 5 years after the discovery, Andrew found himself standing before a packed auditorium at the State University, delivering a lecture about his experience to students studying business, archaeology, and economics. The invitation had come from Dr. Jennifer Harrison, who was researching the economic impact of treasure discoveries on small communities. Andrew had initially declined, feeling uncomfortable with the idea of speaking publicly about his story. But Lucy had convinced him that sharing his experience might inspire others facing difficult circumstances. "The most important lesson I learned," Andrew told the attentive audience, "wasn't about gemstones or bridges or even taking risks. It was about the power of perspective. When I bought that bridge, everyone saw worthless rubble. I saw potential timber for salvage. But the real treasure was hidden deeper than either of us imagined. Sometimes what looks like a disaster is actually an opportunity waiting for the right person to recognize it." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Clark, what would you tell someone who's facing financial hardship and considering taking a big risk like you did?" Andrew paused, thinking about the question carefully. "I'd tell them that there's a difference between taking a calculated risk and gambling recklessly. When I bought that bridge, I had a plan for how to make money from salvaging timber. I didn't buy it hoping to find hidden treasure. The gems were an incredible bonus, but my original plan was sound. If you're going to take risks, make sure you understand what you're risking and have a realistic plan for how things could work out." End quote. After the lecture, Dr. Harrison walked with Andrew across the campus, discussing the broader implications of his discovery. Her research had documented how the treasure find had transformed not just Andrew's life, but the entire economic landscape of Millbrook and the surrounding region. "The ripple effects had been remarkable," she explained. "Tourism revenue has increased by over 400%. Property values have risen, but not to the point where locals are being priced out. New businesses have opened, unemployment has dropped significantly, and the tax base has expanded enough to fund major infrastructure improvements. It's a textbook example of how a single event can revitalize an entire community." End quote. Andrew nodded, though he sometimes felt overwhelmed by the responsibility that came with being the catalyst for so much change. Not everyone in Millbrook had benefited equally from the transformation, and he had tried to address those disparities through his foundation work and community investments. The Millbrook Heritage Foundation, which he had established with $10 million from his treasure proceeds, had become one of the most active community development organizations in the state. Under the leadership of Rebecca Martinez, Sheriff Martinez's daughter who had returned from college with a degree in nonprofit management, the foundation had launched programs addressing education, healthcare, job training, and affordable housing. "Dad always said you were different from the other guys who came through town with big dreams," Rebecca had told Andrew when he offered her the position. "He said you actually cared about the community, not just what you could get out of it. That's why I want to work with you on this." The foundation's flagship program was the Millbrook Opportunity Initiative, which provided microloans and business development support to local entrepreneurs. The program had already helped launch 15 new businesses, from Maria Santos's artisanal bakery to David Chen's computer repair service. Each success story reinforced Andrew's belief that his good fortune was meant to be shared with others. Marcus had graduated from his archaeology program with highest honors and had returned to Millbrook to direct the Bridge Discovery Museum. The museum had become a major tourist attraction, drawing visitors from around the world who wanted to learn about the treasure discovery and the colorful history of Prohibition-era smuggling in rural America. "We're getting visitors from 47 states and 23 countries," Marcus reported during one of their monthly foundation meetings. The economic impact study shows that museum visitors are spending an average of $230 per visit in local businesses. That's supporting jobs throughout the community. The museum's centerpiece was a detailed recreation of the bridge structure, showing exactly how the smugglers had modified the support beams to create their hiding places. Interactive exhibits allowed visitors to experience the thrill of discovery, using replica tools to open reconstructed compartments and find replica gemstones. But Marcus had also insisted on telling the broader story of the era, including displays about the social and economic conditions that had led to Prohibition, the rise of organized crime, and the law enforcement efforts to combat illegal smuggling operations. The museum had become an educational resource, as well as a tourist attraction. Andrew's relationship with Sarah had continued to strengthen over the years. They had remarried in a small ceremony at the local church, with Lucy serving as their only attendant. The second marriage was different from their first, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding that hadn't existed when they were younger. "I understand now that you needed to prove something to yourself," Sarah told him on their second wedding anniversary. "I was so focused on wanting security that I couldn't see you were actually a person who creates security, just not in a conventional way. You don't just accept what life gives you, you find ways to make it better." Lucy, now 13, and wise beyond her years, had adapted to their family's changed circumstances with remarkable maturity. She was an excellent student, but more importantly, she had developed a strong sense of social responsibility that Andrew attributed to watching how he had chosen to use his wealth. "I want to be an archaeologist like Marcus," she announced one evening at dinner, "but I also want to study business so I can help communities like he and Rebecca do. I want to find treasures that help people, not just valuable things." Andrew smiled, thinking about how his daughter was already showing the kind of vision and perspective that could lead to extraordinary outcomes. She understood that the real treasure wasn't the gemstones themselves, but what could be accomplished with the opportunities they provided. The legal aftermath of the discovery had finally been fully resolved the previous year, when the last of the authentication processes were completed and the final tax obligations settled. Andrew's net worth, after all expenses and obligations, was estimated at just over $190 million. The number still seems surreal, but he had learned to think of it not as personal wealth, but as resources that could be used to create positive change. One unexpected consequence of his fame had been the flood of requests for investment advice and partnership opportunities. Andrew received dozens of letters each week from people who wanted him to invest in their business ideas, treasure hunting ventures, or get-rich-quick schemes. Most of these he politely declined, but occasionally he found projects that aligned with his values and experience. He had provided seed funding for a company that developed new technologies for underwater archaeology, helping researchers discover and document shipwrecks and other submerged historical sites. Another investment had gone to a nonprofit organization that taught construction skills to at-risk youth, giving them the hands-on experience and confidence that could lead to stable careers. "The key is finding projects where you can contribute more than just money," Andrew explained to a group of other lottery winners and inheritance recipients who had sought his advice. "I understand construction, I understand small communities, and I understand what it feels like to take risks when you don't have much to lose. Those are the areas where I can add real value, not just financial resources." The bridge site itself had been transformed into a beautiful memorial park and educational center. The new bridge that replaced the old structure was built with modern engineering techniques, but designed to echo the architectural style of the original. Bronze plaques told the story of the discovery and honored the memory of those who had died during the Prohibition-era violence that had left the treasure hidden for so many decades. Walking through the park on quiet mornings, Andrew often reflected on the chain of events that had led him to this point. If he had been less desperate, he might not have considered buying the bridge. If he had been more cautious, he might have settled for salvaging a few surface beams and never discovered the hidden compartments. If Marcus hadn't offered to help, the work might have proceeded too slowly to find everything before the county's deadline. So many small decisions and chance encounters had contributed to the ultimate outcome. It was a reminder that life's most significant moments often emerged from circumstances that seemed ordinary or even unfortunate at the time. Dr. Wong had become not just an appraiser, but a friend and advisor. She had helped Andrew navigate the complex world of art and antiquities collecting, and had introduced him to other collectors who shared his interest in preserving historically significant items for future generations. "You've become one of the most respected collectors in the country," she told him during one of her visits to Millbrook. "But what I find most impressive is that you've never lost sight of why these objects matter. You understand that they're not just valuable things to own, but pieces of history that can teach us about the past and inspire us to do better in the future." End quote. Several pieces from the original discovery had indeed ended up in museums rather than private collections. Andrew had donated a magnificent emerald and diamond necklace to the Smithsonian, where it anchored a new exhibition about American crime during the Prohibition era. A set of ruby jewelry had gone to the Metropolitan Museum, where it was displayed alongside other examples of early 20th century craftsmanship. The tax benefits of these donations were significant, but Andrew's motivation went beyond financial considerations. He wanted the pieces to be preserved and studied by future generations, to contribute to the historical record, rather than disappearing into private collections where they might never be seen again. Attorney Webb had become more than just a legal advisor, evolving into something like a mentor as Andrew learned to navigate the responsibilities that came with significant wealth. Webb's firm now handled all of Andrew's legal needs, from foundation management to investment oversight to estate planning. "The most challenging part of sudden wealth," Webb explained during one of their regular meetings, "isn't learning how to spend money or even how to invest it. It's learning how to live with the knowledge that you have resources to solve problems that most people can't solve. The guilt can be overwhelming if you let it. But the real challenge is figuring out how to use those resources responsibly." Andrew had struggled with exactly that challenge, particularly in his relationships with longtime friends and community members. Some people treated him differently now, either with excessive deference or with resentment about his good fortune. Finding the balance between maintaining normal relationships and acknowledging his changed circumstances required constant attention. Pete Garrison had remained one of his most grounding influences, treating Andrew exactly the same as he had before the discovery. Their morning coffee conversations at the hardware store continued to focus on ordinary topics: weather, local news, Lucy's school activities, and the small dramas of small-town life. "The thing about you, Andrew," Pete said one morning as they watched tourists taking pictures outside the store, "is that you didn't let the money change who you are. You got lucky, sure, but you were a good man before you got lucky, and you're still a good man now. That's rarer than you might think." The comment meant more to Andrew than any of the formal recognition he had received. Awards and honorary degrees were gratifying, but the approval of people who had known him before his good fortune felt more authentic and valuable. Planning for Lucy's future had become one of Andrew's primary concerns. He wanted to ensure that she had every opportunity to pursue her dreams, but he also wanted her to understand the value of work and the importance of contributing to society. The trust fund he had established for her was generous, but structured to encourage education, community service, and meaningful career choices. "I don't want her to grow up thinking that money solves everything," he explained to Sarah as they discussed Lucy's education plans. "The money gives us options, but she still needs to develop her own skills, her own sense of purpose, her own understanding of what makes life meaningful." Lucy seemed to understand these values intuitively. Despite her family's wealth, she continued to participate in regular school activities, maintained friendships with classmates from all economic backgrounds, and showed genuine interest in using her advantages to help others. Her science fair project the previous year had been a study of economic development in rural communities, comparing Millbrook's experience with other towns that had experienced sudden economic changes. Her conclusion was that communities benefited most when economic development was broadly shared and when new resources were invested in education and infrastructure rather than individual consumption. "She's already thinking like a social scientist," Sarah observed with pride. "Whatever she ends up doing with her life, she's going to make a difference." The international attention that Andrew's story had attracted had brought some unexpected opportunities. He had been invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship, risk-taking, and community development. A documentary film about the discovery was in production, with Andrew serving as an executive producer to ensure the story was told accurately and respectfully. Several book publishers had approached him about writing his memoir, but Andrew remained reluctant to commit to such a project. He felt that the story was still unfolding, that the most important chapters might still be ahead rather than behind him. "Maybe in 10 years, he told his literary agent. "When I have more perspective on what this all means, when I can see the long-term impact of the choices we're making now. Right now, I'm still too close to it all to write about it objectively." The bridge discovery had also sparked renewed interest in local history throughout the region. Amateur historians and metal detector enthusiasts regularly explored the area, hoping to find additional evidence of Prohibition-era activity. While no other major treasures had been discovered, several interesting artifacts had been found and donated to the museum. Archaeological surveys of the broader area had revealed evidence of other historical activities as well. Native American settlements, Civil War-era campsites, and early settler homesteads had all left traces that were now being studied and preserved. The bridge discovery had become the catalyst for a much broader effort to understand and protect the region's historical heritage. Andrew took particular satisfaction in knowing that his discovery had led to these broader educational and preservation efforts. The treasure itself was remarkable, but its discovery had opened doors to understanding and appreciating the area's rich history in ways that extended far beyond the original find. As he prepared for another speaking engagement, this time at a conference for small business owners, Andrew reflected on the lessons he had learned and the advice he could offer to others facing difficult circumstances. The core message remained the same. Look for possibilities where others see only problems. Be willing to take calculated risks, work persistently toward your goals, and remember that success is ultimately measured not just by what you gain, but by what cost you contribute to others. The broken bridge had taught him all of these lessons and more. It had shown him that the most valuable discoveries often come from the most unlikely sources, that patience and persistence can reveal hidden treasures, and that true wealth is found not just in what you accumulate, but in what you share and how you use your resources to create positive change. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of entrepreneurs and dreamers, Andrew smiled as he began to tell his story once again. Each time he shared it, he discovered new aspects of its meaning, new lessons that could inspire others to believe in possibilities and pursue their own visions of success. The broken bridge was gone, but its legacy continued to grow, touching lives and inspiring dreams far beyond the borders of Millbrook County. It had become proof that extraordinary opportunities can emerge from the most ordinary circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with enough vision and determination to discover them.